Greetings gamers, over the last few months I've been building a homebrew campaign setting for Dungeons and Dragons, and today I want to talk to you about how I create factions using one of the factions from the Central Tension that we talked about a few weeks ago as an example. If you're new to the channel and to the series, I am making a homebrew D&D campaign and I'm recording every step of the process to give you some inspiration, ideas and some tips. So if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button to keep up to date with all of the latest. So let's dive straight in. We're going to be using a template that I made to find out some of the information about one of the main factions in our Central Tension, which is the Aparthian Empire. Now, this template gets all the basic information that you'd need from a faction down really quickly. Now, you could spend hours and hours and hours creating really in-depth detail for your factions, but for the most part, that's really not needed. It's not something that your players are going to come across, and if they do, using this template makes it really easy to expand upon in the future. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to go down here to the notes section and we want to add everything we already know about the Aparthian Empire. We spent a little bit of time a few weeks ago talking about them as part of our central conflict video, which you can see up here. And we want to get that information into this template straight away so that we can refer back to it. Once we've added the ref notes for this faction, we're going to start right at the top. And you can see here that I've got location, alignment, and the leader of the faction. I've included alignment in this because knowing a faction's alignment and where they fall on the alignment axis can really inform what type of faction they are. So you might have two assassins guilds, one of which is chaotic evil and one of which is lawful good. Well, there's a good chance that they'll be very different in how they operate. The lawful good guild might only take out contracts on criminals, or they might work with governments, whereas the chaotic evil faction might just be purely about the money and the thrill of the kill. So having an alignment there is really useful to give you a rough idea of what kind of people you're going to find in this faction. This left box here is a space for you to add a picture. So it might be the faction's insignia, it might be a picture of the leader, or some other picture that represents your faction. If you don't want to use a picture, that's fine. I've just set up my template so that if I want to use pictures in the future, there's a space there for it. Next up, we've got the description. Now, you don't want to chronicle your faction's entire history here. All you want to do is give a really top-level description of the faction, who they are, what they're about, what they do, just so that you've got a sense of who the faction is. You don't want to go into huge amounts of detail here. Next, we have a section for the leader of your faction. I include this because they're probably going to be the most well-known person within that faction, so it's a good idea to get some information on them before the players ever come across the faction. After that, we've got the command structure. Now, even if your faction doesn't have a traditional rigid hierarchy, I still recommend filling in some information on how the chain of command works in your faction, because it'll give you an idea of the types of people that the players might meet. If, for example, they meet a local thieves guild, it's unlikely they're going to meet the very highest level of the leaders of the thieves guild right away. They're going to meet the low-level street crime committing thieves and then work their way up. So having an idea of how that progression ladder works will help you introduce the players to the faction in a more natural way. Next, we've got the section for motivation and goals, and I really recommend you fill this in even if it's only a few words. Even the motivation of get money can really impact how members of the faction will act. It tells you what their primary goal is, and then you can decide how they'll approach a situation based on how it will affect what they want. Then we've got a section on traits. Now, I like to use traits with my factions so that if players decide they want to start a new character and be part of a specific faction, well, they can get a trait that's suited to that faction and give them that small mechanical bonus. I recommend choosing traits from the pre-published list rather than making your own, both because it saves time and it helps keep things a little bit more balanced because they are already published traits that you're going to be including as part of your faction. And then at the bottom here, as I said, we've got notes, and I've just filled in what we know about the Aparthian Empire so far there, but you can use that to keep track of when your players have come into contact with the faction, whether any faction members have died as a result of the campaign, or anything that impacts on the faction. Then on the left here, we've got a couple of tables. One is for allies and enemies, so you can keep a track of who the faction is allied with, who they've made enemies of, and if those things change, you can really easily make a note of it. And then underneath that, we've got some key figures, both the names of some key figures within the faction and what their roles are. And filling this in before you start playing is going to give you a nice list of NPCs that your players might meet when they're introduced into the faction. So I'm going to fill in all this information, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to see what we know about the Aparthian Empire. And here we are. You can see I've filled in all the information about the Aparthian Empire, and we'll take some time to just go through that and learn a little bit about them. So starting up top with our description, we know that the Aparthian Empire is a collection of nations, dominions, colonies, protectorates, mandates, and other territories ruled or administrated by Aparthia, which is the country where the empire is from. It stretches from Ashk in the west all the way to the Endless Sea in the east, and is comprised of more than a dozen nations and smaller regions. I've made a note that when it conquers a nation, the conquered are given the option to become a full citizen, and with that comes the benefits of citizenship. So their stipend from the government, their ability to vote in elections, and some other benefits. And it also means that they can be called upon to serve in the Aparthian military. I've also noted that when a conquered person becomes a citizen, they must renounce their religion and take up the worship of Sophos the Grandfather, because that's a really key part of the Aparthian Empire, is this monotheistic worship of Sophos. And then I've added some details of the leader of the Aparthian Empire. So we've got Alexio Vasilius, who is the Emperor of Aparthia and her territories, protector of the free peoples and defender of the faith of Sophos. To make things a little more interesting in our old versus new dynamics that we've got going with our central tension here in Ashk, I've decided that the Emperor should be newly elected and be a young-blooded politician who has some pretty radical ideas, which puts him in direct opposition to the old world, the old families of Ashk. I probably spent the most time coming up with the command structure for the Empire because I wanted a really clear idea of how an empire made up of so many nations would actually run. So I've broken it down into different levels. Right at the top we have the Emperor, who is elected by the Senate, and their job is to lead the empire as a whole and be the figurehead of the empire. One rung down from that we have Parliament, which is a group of ministers selected by the emperor to perform specific duties. So we could have the defense minister or the justice minister, and each of them is responsible for certain duties on an empire-wide scale. Next we have the Senate and the senators. Now these are elected officials who represent a reasonably large area of the empire, and they come together and they make a lot of the empire-wide laws, and they're also responsible for electing the emperor. And then one rung below that we have local councillors. Now these are people like mayors, people who are in charge of cities or small states, and they're more responsible for the collection of local taxes and keeping the day-to-day of the empire running. And then finally, at the bottom of the command structure of the empire is the people who vote for their councillors, their senators, and who are impacted by the choices of everyone above them. When thinking about the motivations and goals for the Aparthian Empire, I wanted slavery to be one of the key aspects of them. They want to rid the world of slavery. They want to free all of the slaves. And they also want to unite the world in the worship of Sophos, because in the Empire's eyes, there is only one god. But I also wanted to add something a little more ambiguous and something that could be a little less clear-cut, and have one of their goals to be the expansion of the Empire. Leaving that vague means that there's room for corruption, there's room for people who want to expand the Empire to increase their own wealth, there's room for people who want to expand the Empire because they believe the Empire is better than other people, and it just adds a little bit of grey area that we can play in and make some interesting characters. For traits, this is going to be part of my Pathfinder game, so I've taken a couple of the Pathfinder traits, and I obviously chose Enemy of Slavers because the Empire is very anti-slavery, and I also chose Freed Slaves. So if a player wants to have a background as a part of the Empire, they could either choose the Enemy of Slavers, or they could choose to be a freed slave who is a citizen of the Empire. Over on the left here, where we've got our allies and enemies, at the moment the only enemy that I've listed is Ashk, because for the purposes of this campaign, that's all we need to know. Ashk and the Empire are currently at war, and that is where our central conflict comes in, so that's the only really important one to know at this point. For key figures, I chose several members of the Aparthian Parliament in the form of these ministers, because in all likelihood, if the players were to come into contact with the Empire, they're not going to meet the Emperor. They're going to meet different ministers, junior ministers, senior ministers, or some of these key figures responsible for some important aspects of the Empire, but they're not going to meet the Emperor himself. So there we have it. That is how I plan out a faction for my D&D campaign. I really hope that you found this video useful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with all the latest in this Making a Homebrew campaign series. But until next time, happy gaming. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below for new content every single Friday. And if you want to keep watching, well, there's another couple videos for you to watch just over there. Happy gaming.